Hey guys, I'm Gad from Ignite here. Today we're going to be doing an analysis of Inside My Mother. But before we get started, please be sure to check out our website, ignitehsc.com.au, for more HSC resources, and like and subscribe to our channel. Let's get into it. So before we get into the video, it's important that we do an acknowledgement of country, especially because the texts that you are studying are Aboriginal texts, and it's important to recognise the history of Aboriginal people in Australia and their importance in our future. So I would like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, which is the land that we're filming this video on, and to recognise elders both past, present and emerging. And to always keep this in the back of your mind when you're studying these texts, to think about the Aboriginal history because it's very important. And if you do feel like you need to research or to understand more, it's important that you contact and read information about these issues from Aboriginal sources so you can get a fair and realistic representation of what they're about and what they mean to Aboriginal people. Let's get into it. So today we're going to be focusing on Unearth, a poem written by Eckermann, which deals with intergenerational trauma and historical erasure. Now that's an important first step when you think about any poem, is to think, what is the theme? What is Eckermann trying to say predominantly in this poem? Think about it in isolation of your rubric, because that will end up being the conceptual focus of your body paragraphs. Then the next step, once you've established, okay, what is Eckermann trying to say, think about how that links to the rubric. Now, Eckermann's poem, the tone is quite warlike. It's almost like a call to arms for Aboriginal people. And that represents how the language is used. It has a very specific tone and a certain type of language that is used to stir, or it's something that you might hear in a war cry. This war cry tone links to these issues of identity and culture, both of which have been severed and been fractured throughout history because of certain impositions by the Australian government. And this poem seeks to think about how and why these aspects of the Aboriginal experience should be reclaimed. The third, and we've briefly touched on this already, is the tone of the poem. What is the purpose of what it's trying to do? Here it's a call to arms, and you should be able to see that reflected in the way in which the language is used, and we'll get into that really soon. And number 4 is how to find your quotes. Now it's important to make sure you have quotes that cover the entirety of the poem. For example, this poem is 4 stanzas, so I would recommend picking one quote or one section per stanza, just so you get a nice coverage of the poem and you can understand how it progresses and why it progresses. This is our first piece of analysis from the first stanza. Let's dig up the soil and excavate the past. Breathe life into the bodies of our ancestors. Now, when you're analysing, you can pick 1 or 2 techniques that best represent what it is that you're trying to say. In this case, there are a few examples that you could use. So the first is let's, which is an exhortation. It's a cry, it's a call to arms, a demand for action. And it's interesting to note that this is the only poem, one of the few poems that deals in first person. And that shows that Eckermann is trying to reach out to her audience. She's trying to engage them in the text. She's trying to reach out to her Aboriginal peers and also to reach out and make aware her message to non-Aboriginal readers who may be reading this. It's essentially a call to readers, a call to also the bodies of our ancestors, which is an interesting shift from first person, and it brings in, again, not only the reader, but also the people, her ancestors. It's a call to not only the present, but also the past. It's making aware that the modern definition, the modern experience of Aboriginal people, and non-Aboriginal people for that matter, should be dictated by an understanding and learning from past experiences. Now, this learning from the past is quite evident in the metaphorical value of soil and excavate. Now, excavate is a particularly interesting word because it's a modern day example of how a lot of Aboriginal land has been used and dug up for ventures by the Australian government, such as mining. Now, this creates, especially if we understand the deep relationship that the Aboriginal people have with their past and how that past is embedded in country, in the Australian landscape, this becomes quite a pointed address to the institutions and to the politics that have defined the Aboriginal connection with modern day Australia. And that's an important thing to think about throughout the poem, and it's a really strong opening to the poem. It reveals Eckermann's message, it reveals why she's writing the poem. She wants to stir modern day Aboriginal, she wants to stir modern day people to think about how modern day practices and practices in the past associated with the abuse of land have had a dramatic impact on the way in which Aboriginal people today can relate to that landscape. So now we get on to the second stanza, which will progress this idea. So the sound of the rising warriors echo, a people suppressed by dread. So as we've discussed before, the tone of the poem is quite warlike, it's a call to arms. And this is quite evident in the word choice warriors. Now, Aboriginal warriors is a term that we hear often in modern day society, and it refers to people who are fighting for the cause of Aboriginal people who are fighting for the cause of recognition of their identity, recognition of their connection to country, recognition of land rights. And this is a really interesting word choice, particularly considering the overall tone and purpose of the poem. It's a really effective representation of the way in which language can be used to heighten the message of what the poet is trying to achieve, but also represent its broader context and how it relates and how it's situated in that landscape. It's also important to consider the juxtaposition between rising and suppressed, which are obviously opposite active actions. Now that represents then the pledge for these warriors to rise up against and to combat the issues that Aboriginal people face throughout, but it also points to the difficulties associated with this rebellion, with this call to arms, with this challenging of institutions that have suppressed them in the past. So it shows us this is the issue, but it shows us why now, why is this an issue? Why has it continued to become a problem for Aboriginal people to attempt to reclaim their identity and their culture?
Hey guys, thank you so much for watching. If you do like the content, subscribe to our channel and we'll have more videos coming your way.
That's right guys, thanks for watching, and please make sure you check out our online resource database. We've had a team of state rank achievers and heads of English put these together for you, covering everything from essay structures and examples all the way through to craft of writing and comprehension skills. So check them out at ignitehse.com.au, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video.